scripture today, and that is Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16. And we are going to be in verse 24. Before we look at that, I want to show you all some pictures. You guys looking? Here's some pictures I want you guys to see. Stop. Oh, okay. Here's one. Another one. One more. So keep those images in your mind, and let's read Matthew 16, verse 24. And it reads, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.' Again, then Jesus said to his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.'" And the part of this verse that I want us to focus on is the last part, which says that he must follow me. And the Message version, it paraphrases, a few verses, but it says, Then Jesus went to work on his disciples. "Anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat, I am. Don't run from suffering, embrace it. Follow me and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way to finding yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for?" And so, in looking at those images that I showed you, what did you see?
A child following their father.
Imprints, impressions.
Different kinds of imprints, some feet, some shoes.
A mark being left.
Mm-hmm. So all those are correct. So what I showed you were different images of footprints. And the meaning of footprint, as you all have said those words, is an impression left by a foot or a shoe on the ground or surface on the earth. And what we talked about today is the question that we had to do an exercise. And the exercise was for us to ask ourselves, in the work that we're doing, who are you? What are the footprints that you would leave behind? And I want us to think about that in our spiritual walk. Are you leaving footprints? And what footprints are you leaving? And so when we look at footprints, when you look at that picture, if you've ever been somewhere and you've seen footprints, you can tell a lot of information from those footprints. You can see, one, that somebody was there. You can see, two, that you can see an idea of the size of the person, because you can tell if it's a little foot or a bigger foot. You can tell what they were doing, if they were walking at a certain distance, or if they were even running, because maybe the whole foot wasn't there, but just kind of the toes. We can follow their path, which tells us a little bit about where they came from and what they did. And so in this verse, Jesus tells us that we are to deny ourselves, we're to take up the cross, and we're to follow him. We're not to do things on our own, but we are to follow in the footsteps that he has left. And so we have to ask ourselves, I want us to ask ourselves, are we making a lasting impression? What will your footprints tell the person that follows you? And then we look at the footprints of Jesus. What does his footprints tell us? And we learn so much by following in his footsteps. We learn so much about the type of people that we are supposed to be. We learn so much about how we are to help and lead other people. Then the question I have, and you guys answer this, are footprints made every time you make a step?
Depends on what it
You said no, it depends on who you are. I see Malcolm,
is.
where you are. Malcolm shaking his head yes. You say yes.
Yeah.
Anyone else? What are your thoughts?
Even if you don't realize it,
Yeah, I was about to say, still there.
there are microscopic footprints that you're leaving. Whatever you have put an impression on, whether it's dirt that you're tracking or even this floor, you might not see the footprint, but if we look at it, yeah, there's a print.
So I think both of your answers are right. You're thinking about more the seeing.
Right.
Can you see the footprints? But the things we have to realize is that we're making a footprint everywhere we go. And so the thing is it visible? And if we think about the life of Jesus, was his footprints visible? They were. And if we're to follow him, that means that our footprints must be visible too. And if it's visible, what is it saying about us? What is it saying about our life? What is it saying about the impression that we make? When someone looks at our footprints, can they see that we were even there? Are they able to see that we were there? Do they have an idea of who we were? Can they tell what we were doing based off of our footprints? Can they follow in? Did we leave a path that they are able to follow? Because that's what Jesus tells us to do. He tells us to make disciples, that we're to be disciples, to make other disciples. He tells us to follow him. And we have to make sure that we are making a lasting impression on the people that we encounter, on the things in this world. What do your footprints say about you? What do they say about their life? In the exercise that we did today at my job, we had little cutout, cute little footprints. And we had to sit and think about, and they broke us up into groups, and we had to sit and think about who we are. What impression do we want to leave? If we were to leave, what would people say about us? What impression do you want someone to say about you? And what impression are you making currently, if any? And so again, today I really just wanted us to just kind of think about those things. I'm gonna open it up to the floor if anybody. But again, Jesus tells us that we are to follow in his footsteps. And so again, looking at this image right here, this was the one that I really thought was because it's not about us making our own footprints. It's not about us making our own path. But just as this little child is walking in the same steps that her father, assume that it's her father, that's how we're to do. And we're to leave a mark so that someone else can follow behind us. So what do your footprints say about you? What impression are you leaving upon the world? Are you following in Jesus' footsteps? Any thoughts? Any answers?
I'm not sure. I mean, of course, you're your own worst critic, but I'm not sure. I mean, other people would say differently, but I feel like some murky. Kind of, they're not as clear as they need to be to identify that that's a footprint. I feel like I could be doing a lot better.
Do you think that anybody's ever followed you?
Yes.
So do you think they can follow a murky footprint?
No. That's why I said I feel like I could be doing better. But I don't. And like I said, I'm my own worst critic, so I don't know, because somebody will say something different, and then I'll be like, oh, well, thank you, but I don't think so, but thank you, but I don't think so, you know? But I just me knowing the level of, just knowing how I need to pursue Christ, I do feel like I should be doing a whole lot better, and I feel like my footprints is kind of murky at the moment.
Is it the same footsteps of Jesus?
Well, no, because I don't know what to say, because like she's following her dad. Sometimes you go off on your own tangent and you like, oh, where are his footprints? When you go back to that kind of thing, it's more I'm doing better on that thing now. Less going off on my own, way less, like way less. But yeah, I think they could be clearer prints. That's what I think.
And I think the part that will maybe help you is looking at the message version. Anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as long as you're focused on allowing not to not be in the next part, you're not in the driver's seat. I am. I know that's like so you.
Well, I can't even say passenger. I got in the trunk.
Mm-hmm.
But that's interesting that you say that, because I was literally reading. I sent it to Shane earlier. I forgot what book I was reading. Oh, 1 John 23, and the Holy Spirit asked me like, "How well do you know God?" And I was like, "Oh, I think I do pretty well." And then it was like 1 John 2:3 says, "We know that we have come to know Him if we obey His commands." Mm-hmm. And then I had to ask myself the question out loud: mm-hmm. How well do I know God? Mm-hmm. Kind of thing. So I'm just like, I'm literally finding out what it is to trust Him, blind faith, like to trust Him without knowing all the details, mm-hmm. and it's finally starting to be okay with me that I don't know all the details. Mm-hmm. And when stuff happens, I don't get all super helter-skelter. I literally just start reminding myself of God's promises and what He said, instead of believing what's happening in the moment. Mm-hmm. So it's just, yeah, it's a work in progress. Definitely a work in progress. As you will know that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I think one of the ways, well, another question I ask is, do you know who you're following? And if not, why are you following them? So in this case, I guess, how well do we know Jesus? I think the difference in that picture is that that little child leads and follows that parent in blind faith, and I doubt would ever question if her dad was like, we're going this way. She would never ever think my dad's not just going to take me somewhere into danger, or she's just trusting him. And so I think and she can't see. Mm-hmm. So
look at where her head is.
She's looking straight down. All she needs to see is his footprints, and she's straight.
So I think it's a question of trust and belief. So many times we don't follow, because we don't trust and believe. We actually think our way is better. And that's where it becomes problematic. But, like I said, I think last Saturday or the week before, the thing that was phenomenal about Jesus is that he trusted the Father for everything. And so that is the example that we're following. Can we trust the Father for everything? Even in the midst where you think, oh, God, are you with me? Do you still trust Him?
Yes, ma'am.
Two things just even looking at the picture, what you said. One, looking at the picture, like you said, the little girl's looking down, right? All she's looking for the footsteps. She's not questioning, not worried, blind faith, no doubt, right? Like wherever they lead me, I'm going, okay? Now, that's how we have to be, right? And following Christ. And then two, we also have to think about this season that we've been talking about maturing in our faith and being stable and not, you know, being tossed to and fro and things like that, because we also have to think about the people who will follow our footsteps and where that will lead them. And it should lead them to Christ. So it's like, first and foremost, we have to get in a position to be like that child, right? And have that blind faith, and then also know that it's not just for ourselves, but it's also for those who are looking at us or who may follow our footsteps. Don't just follow me, but I hope my footsteps will lead you to Christ. So we have to pray.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm there with the following and the leading and all that, but as Eris was talking, it dawned on me that Jesus was talking to his disciples, telling them that they should take up the cross and follow him, and not realizing that the same disciples that, as Eris was talking, it just dawned on me that the same disciples he was telling them that they need to take up the cross and follow him would have been that Simon was one of his disciples, and he ended up taking the cross for Christ, which eventually he bare all he was put on that same cross, not realizing that there's an allusion to him telling them that they need to take up their cross and follow him, where one of the disciples literally took up the cross and followed him, putting the whole thing that he was giving them, and he's giving us the whole belief of that child walking in the sand, that we need to be patient, we need to walk our life, keep our lives in that atmosphere and in a spirit of belief at all time. We need to walk in humility, because based on how these footprints are set in the sand, that just show how our lives are. Because if you're skipping, then you're happy, you're at peace, you're walking in faith because you're skipping. So that's how the sand is. But if you're treading, you're walking so slow, the steps and the footprints will be so close to each other. But if you're making huge steps, the steps gonna be farther apart, so the person that's walking behind you have to make their own footsteps, because their own footprints in the sand, because they can't keep up the speed that you're going. So we all have to pick up our own cross and bear it. But at the same time, the footprints are there as a guide to let us know that we are walking in the right direction. Not necessarily to me that we need to walk in the same footprint, because we don't know what that person was doing when they were walking in the sand. We don't know how many times they stopped along the way while they were walking in the sand. We don't know what they were doing while they were walking in the sand, but it's a guide to let us know that we are on the right path. So my whole thing is humility, it's zeal, it's patience, it's faith, it's just following with all of these, not realizing that eventually we have to take up that cross and walk in that sand for ourselves. Because eventually we might get to a point where that footprint might disappear, and if that footprint disappears, what are we going to do? What are we going to do if we walk, follow the footprints, but eventually there's no more footprints? What will we do? It's the same way with us in our spiritual lives. The word has been brought forth every day. What if there's nobody to bring the word? What are we going to do? Are we just going to walk out through this door? That's a footprint. But we take things sometimes literally instead of transferring it over to the spiritual aspect and our growth. That's how I see footprints. Because Pastor Alex is our pastor. He might be wearing a size 15 shoes. I don't wear a size 15 shoe, just like that kid, walking in the size of a footprint that is not hers. But they still walked. And that's exactly how I am seeing it, that even though we're walking, we got to learn how to walk for ourselves. Because we got to carry that cross for ourselves. We got to walk in that footprint for ourselves. Because once that footprint is finished, we got to know where we will put our footprint after that. Because we cannot be walking in somebody's footprint all the days of our lives.
We're supposed to walk in Jesus' footprint.
In Jesus' footprint all the days of our life. But because we're looking at a picture, we don't want it to just transfer it to the natural. We always want it to be to the spiritual.
But just to help.
We need to follow, but at the end of the day, so many of people get stuck. They get stuck to a certain point that, oh, where did, like Jesus said this, the strides were too big. I can't catch up to that. Oh, I don't know if he turned left, I don't know if he turned right, because we're not focused. So we have to walk by faith.
Yeah,
We have to walk by faith.
definitely.
But
And we also have to be sure of who we're following.
who we're following,
Yeah.
Do you know?
Definitely. And the other thing is, you know, what you said about taking up the cross, like we have to not be afraid of the suffering.
That part.
And has anybody ever ran in the sand before?
Yeah, it's tiring.
It's tiring, you have to put in more work,
Mm-hmm.
but yet but the payoff is great.
Yeah.
And so realizing that you might have to step down a little bit harder, you might have to lift up your leg a little bit more, but that's what bearing the cross is about. It's about suffering. And so not thinking like, oh, am I doing too much? Or that's how you know when you're really doing it is when you can feel it. And so not running from that, but instead embracing it and knowing that this is what we have to do, and not comparing our pain to someone else's, because we all have our own cross to bear, and it's gonna look different and be different. So again, this is something for us to think about, and you know, what's your footprints? What impression are you leaving? And so that's the way of the Lord. Any other thoughts?
Amen.
Amen.